The air was thick with tension, and the hospital's sterile walls couldn't shield anyone from the undercurrent of fear and disbelief that hung in the atmosphere. It wasn't just any day at the emergency room. A situation was unfolding that no one could have anticipated, one that would push the limits of justice, loyalty, and love. It started with a cry, a mother's cry, as she reached out in desperation to a figure who, for many, represented authority and control. But this wasn't just any figure. This was a cop, a man whose actions were about to send shockwaves through the lives of two families and the community at large. Tasha, a mother of two, had always prided herself on keeping a low profile. She worked hard, raised her children with love, and stayed out of trouble. But that morning, as she sat in the hospital waiting for her baby girl to undergo a routine checkup, she had no idea that her world was about to unravel. The waiting room buzzed with quiet chatter, the kind you might expect in any hospital where people came for checkups. But for Tasha, it felt different. Something was off. Her stomach churned with an uneasy feeling she couldn't shake. Her daughter, Maya, had been playing with her toys, a smile lighting up her face, unaware of the storm brewing just outside the door. In the midst of this ordinary moment, the doors swung open, and an officer, Detective Johnson, stepped in. He was a man who had been known around town for his intimidating demeanor and for his unyielding enforcement of the law. But today, his presence would strike terror into Tasha's heart. Without a word, he approached the young mother. His eyes cold and distant, he moved toward Maya. In one swift motion, he picked up the little girl, who was barely old enough to understand what was happening. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" Tasha demanded, her voice shaking as she stood to her feet. Her heart pounded in her chest. What could this man possibly want with her child? "This is for her own safety," the officer muttered, his voice low and devoid of empathy. "We're taking her into protective custody." The words hung in the air like a sick joke. Tasha's legs felt like jelly as the panic rose in her chest. She tried to reach for Maya, but the officer pulled her back, his grip tight and unyielding. Her eyes pleaded with him, but there was no softness in his gaze. This wasn't about protecting anyone. It was about something far darker. She was alone in the room now, trapped in a nightmare that she couldn't even comprehend. Tasha had heard rumors about this officer, stories of him being overzealous, of him having a history of racial profiling. But she had never thought it would touch her. Not her family. But as she stood there, helpless and powerless, the bitter reality set in. This was happening, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. But there was someone who could. FBI Chief Marcus Hayward had been married to Tasha for over a decade. Their bond had been unshakable, built on years of mutual respect and trust. He was the rock in her life, the one person who always had her back. Marcus was known for his quick thinking and relentless pursuit of justice, no matter how high the stakes were. His career had put him in some dangerous situations, but he always came out on top. Today, however, his resolve would be tested in ways he never could have imagined. Just as the officer moved toward the exit, Tasha reached for her phone and dialed Marcus's number with trembling fingers. The seconds seemed like hours as the phone rang, each ring a reminder of how much was at stake. Her breath hitched in her chest as the phone clicked, and she heard his voice. "Marcus, something's wrong. They're taking Maya." Before she could finish, there was a sudden, sharp knock at the hospital door. Tasha's heart skipped a beat as she looked up, a glimmer of hope flashing through her panic-stricken eyes. Could it be? In an instant, Marcus was there. The FBI chief, her husband, had arrived. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the sight of the officer holding Maya. The room fell silent. The tension in the air was palpable, like the calm before a storm. Marcus's presence was commanding, and it was clear that the situation had just escalated in a way that no one expected. "Put her down." Marcus's voice was steady, filled with authority. There was no hesitation in his words, no uncertainty. It was the voice of a man who had seen it all, but even he couldn't mask the seething anger beneath the surface. Detective Johnson hesitated, his grip tightening on Maya, his face suddenly a mask of uncertainty. But he wasn't ready to back down. He had a job to do, or at least that's what he thought. The officer's hand tightened around Maya's tiny frame, as though he was ready for a fight. "What is this about, Marcus?" The officer sneered, his voice laced with contempt. It was clear he was trying to maintain control, but the situation was slipping through his fingers. "She's being taken into custody. You're not above the law." Marcus took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "You don't get to decide that. You don't have the authority to make that call." The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of their meaning. Every person in the room knew that what was happening was wrong. It wasn't about the law anymore. It was about power, about control. It was about a corrupt system that would only back down when it was forced to. The hospital, once a place of healing, had become the setting for an explosive confrontation. The nurses and staff watched in silence, unsure of what would happen next, but they knew this wasn't going to end quietly. Every eye was on Marcus and Detective Johnson, and no one dared to move. "You're making a mistake," Marcus said, his voice cold now, cutting through the tension like a knife. But the officer didn't relent. "It's too late for apologies. This is happening, whether you like it or not." Tasha's breath hitched as she stood frozen, watching the standoff unfold before her eyes. She knew her husband was capable, but this was more than just a fight for their daughter's safety. It was a battle against a system that had always found ways to turn a blind eye to injustice. As the standoff continued, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. He didn't have to answer. It was clear he had bigger things to worry about right now. But the fact that he had received an alert spoke volumes. Something was coming. The air in the room grew even thicker, and the tension between Marcus and the officer was unbearable. The next few moments would decide everything. But what would happen next? Would Marcus be able to save Maya, or had the system already won? Could a corrupt officer's grip on the situation be loosened? Or was this a battle that would stretch far beyond the walls of the hospital? And what was that message that just appeared on Marcus's phone? The answers could change everything, but they were locked in a race against time, with everything on the line. Marcus stood in the middle of the hospital room, his gaze never leaving Detective Johnson, his fingers tapping absently against his phone. The tension in the air felt suffocating, as though time itself had frozen. He was used to difficult situations, had faced life or death scenarios in his years with the FBI. But this was different. This wasn't a high-speed chase or a dangerous criminal. This was his wife's child, his daughter, and this officer was trying to take her for reasons that made no sense. He glanced at Tasha, who stood there with her hands clenched tightly, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes locked onto him, and in them he could see the deep fear that she was trying so hard to mask. He had promised her that nothing would ever hurt their family, that he would always protect them. But now, standing here in this sterile hospital room, he could feel the weight of that promise hanging in the air. He couldn't fail her now. "Marcus," Tasha whispered, her voice breaking as she stepped closer to him. "What's happening? Why is he doing this? What is going on?" Marcus didn't look away from the officer as he spoke softly, just loud enough for her to hear. "I don't know yet, but I'll find out. I'm not letting him take Maya." But even as he spoke those words, doubt began to gnaw at him. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. There was something bigger at play here, something deeper than just a row cop making a bad call. The officer's cold indifference to the situation, his refusal to back down even when faced with someone as powerful as Marcus, spoke to a larger, more dangerous problem. Marcus had seen it before: corruption. Power that was abused, twisted, and used to control. This wasn't just about a child. This was about a system that was broken, a system that targeted the most vulnerable and never had to answer for its actions. "Sir, I'm warning you," Detective Johnson said, his voice growing more defensive. "You need to step aside. This is a legal matter." Marcus's voice dropped to a dangerous calm, his every word measured and precise. "You're out of line, and you know it. I'm FBI. This doesn't involve you anymore." Tasha's heart raced as she looked back and forth between the two men, each locked in a silent battle of wills. Her mind was racing with questions. Why Maya? Why now? What did this officer have against her family? She remembered something from years ago, something she had tried to forget. Marcus had always been vocal about the systemic corruption within certain parts of law enforcement. It was something that had always made her uneasy, especially when Marcus spoke about it in hushed tones late at night. She knew he had uncovered things, dangerous things, but had always kept it to himself. It wasn't that he didn't trust her. It was because he knew she'd worry. But now the pieces were starting to fall into place. This wasn't just about a rogue officer. This was bigger than that. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. Her mind flashed back to an argument they had had just a week ago. Marcus had come home late, his face strained, his shoulders tense. He had been working a case for weeks, something involving high-ranking officials within the city. He hadn't said much about it, but she could tell it was eating away at him. "I'm just worried, Marcus," she had said that night, her voice soft but filled with concern. "You're getting too close. This case, it feels like it's pulling you in deeper." At the time, Marcus had brushed it off. "It's nothing, Tasha. Just a few bad apples. We'll clean it up." But now she understood. He had been up against something much more dangerous than just a few bad officers. He had been up against a network, something dark and far-reaching, and they had just made their move. Taking Maya. It was a message. Just then, Marcus's phone buzzed again, more urgently this time. He glanced down at the screen and saw the name of one of his most trusted agents. A knot tightened in his chest. He pressed the phone to his ear without hesitation. "Marcus Hayward," he said, his voice sharper now. "Chief," the agent's voice crackled on the other end. "We've got a problem. The intel we've been tracking, it's connected to this officer. Detective Johnson is more than just a cop. He's been working with a larger group, and they've been pulling strings behind the scenes. The custody order for Maya, it's not just about her. This is about sending a message to you. To stop digging. They know what you're after, and they're moving fast." Marcus's grip tightened on his phone as the realization hit him. How did they know? His voice was low, but filled with a rising fury. How the hell did they know? "We're still looking into it," the agent replied. "But the system they've got is deep, Marcus. Very deep. We've got sources in law enforcement who've been feeding them information. It's bigger than we thought." The agent's words were a punch to the gut. They had no idea how deep this went, how many people were involved. The conspiracy was vast, and Maya was nothing more than a pawn. A child caught in the crossfire of a war Marcus hadn't even known he was fighting. "Stay on it," Marcus said, ending the call. He turned back to face the officer, his expression colder now, his stance firm and unyielding. "Listen to me, Johnson," Marcus began, his voice low but dripping with authority. You're not taking my daughter. Whatever you think you're involved in, this stops now. I'm giving you one chance to walk away." The officer's eyes flickered for the briefest of moments, uncertainty creeping into his expression. But he quickly masked it, his resolve hardening again. He wasn't backing down. He wasn't the only one with a vested interest in this situation. There were others, powerful people, who wanted Maya gone, and they had given Johnson a task to complete. "I don't have a choice," Johnson said, his voice almost apologetic, but there was no stopping him now. "I'm following orders." Marcus's eyes flashed with anger. His jaw clenched as he took another step forward, but before he could speak again, the door to the room slammed open. A group of uniformed officers burst into the room, their faces cold and unreadable. They weren't here to help. They were here to escalate. The confrontation was about to get much more complicated, and the clock was ticking. Marcus knew that this wasn't just about Maya anymore. This was war, and he was going to have to fight it from the inside out. But how far would he have to go? How many people would he have to expose? And more importantly, how much of his own family would he be willing to sacrifice in order to uncover the truth? The door slammed open with a force that reverberated through the hospital room, and Marcus immediately recognized the men who stormed inside. They weren't here to help. They were here to escalate. Uniformed officers, each carrying the cold, practiced look of someone who'd followed orders without question. Marcus's pulse quickened, his mind racing as he took in the situation. Tasha's breath hitched, and she instinctively took a step toward Marcus, her hand reaching out for his. She knew, just as he did, that this had gone far beyond a simple mistake. They weren't just dealing with a corrupt officer anymore. They were up against a well-oiled machine, one that had planned every move, every detail, with chilling precision. Marcus didn't flinch as the officers positioned themselves between him and Maya. His gaze was fixed, unwavering, on Detective Johnson, whose face had gone pale, though he was still trying to project authority. The other officers in the room weren't just standing by. They were ready to move, and it was clear now that they had no intention of letting Maya go. "Maya is coming with us," one of the officers said, his voice flat, devoid of any empathy. "Step aside, Chief." Marcus's hand clenched into a fist, his jaw tightening as he looked at the man who dared to give him orders. He had spent his entire career fighting for justice, but now justice seemed like a distant memory. These were men he had trusted at one point, men who had sworn an oath to protect, not to destroy. But as the seconds ticked by, Marcus realized there was no negotiating here. These officers weren't his colleagues anymore. They were a part of the system that needed to be torn down. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" Marcus's voice was steady, but it was laced with an edge of fury. "You're not just making a mistake. You're making a deal with the devil. Let Maya go. Now." The officer didn't respond. He simply nodded to the others, signaling them to move forward. But before anyone could act, a new voice cut through the tension. "Stop." The voice came from the doorway, and everyone turned in unison. The new figure stood tall, confident, a presence that commanded attention. It was Agent Klein, one of Marcus's most trusted allies in the FBI. He wasn't alone. Behind him, several other agents stepped into the room, their expressions grim but resolute. "Step away from the child," Agent Klein ordered, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "These men are under investigation. Their orders are no longer valid." A collective gasp filled the room. The officers, those who had been so certain of their actions, looked stunned, as if they couldn't fathom that their own had just been appended. The tension was palpable. Marcus's chest tightened with a mix of relief and anger. How much of this had they known? How deep did the corruption run? But there was no time for answers now. It was all happening in front of him, the pieces falling into place, one after another. The officer who had been holding Maya froze, his grip slackening as he processed Agent Klein's words. Maya, still clutched in his arms, looked up at him, confused but sensing the change in the air. She started to squirm, wanting to return to her mother. Tasha's heart pounded as she stepped forward, reaching out her arms. "Maya, baby, come here," Tasha whispered, her voice trembling with relief as she gently pulled her daughter into her arms. The little girl clung to her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Tasha felt like she could breathe again. Marcus turned to Agent Klein, his expression softening for just a moment before hardening again. "What the hell is going on here, Klein? What took you so long?" "We were tracking this for weeks, Marcus," Agent Klein explained, his gaze steady. "We got the intel on the officers working with the cartel, and this was their plan all along, using Maya as leverage against you. They knew you were getting too close to exposing them, and they thought they could use her to silence you." Marcus's mind raced as the weight of the truth settled in. It wasn't just about a corrupt officer or a rogue group. This was a cartel, dangerous, influential, and deeply embedded within law enforcement. They had been trying to pull strings for years, manipulating the system from within, and Marcus had unknowingly walked right into their trap. They had thought they could intimidate him, take his daughter, and break him. But they had underestimated one thing: the strength of a father's love and the power of those who truly fought for justice. "We've got the full scope now," Agent Klein continued. "The conspiracy goes all the way up. But it ends here. We've got enough to take them down. All of them." Marcus exhaled, the tension in his body slowly easing. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But they had won this battle. They had saved Maya. And for now, that was enough. Tasha held Maya close, rocking her gently as tears welled in her eyes. She looked up at Marcus, her face filled with gratitude, relief, and a touch of exhaustion. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Marcus nodded, his eyes never leaving his family. "We did it. Together." But as much as he wanted to savor this moment, he knew this was just the beginning. The corruption was far-reaching, and it wouldn't be easy to dismantle. But now, with Maya safely in his arms, Marcus was ready for whatever came next. He would take down every last one of them, no matter the cost. As the agents began to secure the room, Marcus took Tasha's hand, pulling her close. "We're not done yet," he said quietly. "But we're not alone anymore. We've got each other." The room was still, the weight of the moment settling over everyone. But there was hope now. Hope that things could change. Hope that justice could still prevail. And as they walked out of the hospital, hand in hand, with Maya nestled safely between them, Marcus felt a sense of determination rise within him. The fight for his family was over, for now. But the fight for something bigger had only just begun. The darkness they had uncovered would be exposed, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to hide. This wasn't just about one corrupt officer. It was about bringing down a system that had failed too many. And Marcus knew that no matter what it took, he would stand at the front of that fight. Because in the end, it wasn't just about the truth. It was about protecting the people he loved. And he would never stop fighting for them. The next few moments would decide everything.